obviously, it would be my focus and my opinion on things, and we're not going to have a big disagreement if you differ on some things. But let me mention one other thing. Before we break, there's one that's in kind of a gold and the other's in a gray. We won't do it till we eat it. But I was able to, and some of you will have the books, but I did one article on, and kenosis is that word in Philippians that he emptied himself. Even though he was in the form of God, he didn't consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking on the form of the servant. And again, that's where we have the word diakoneo, where he serves by emptying and lowering himself. So one of those is on kenosis as the cornerstone of ministry. The other one is on elders as a spiritual leader. And those are things that we'll just leave with you to read, and didn't want to try to approach those specifically. Two things to start with, and then open the floor for anything else. The first one is, and it's just children of quotations, what if a man has only one child? Our middle daughter only has one girl. And when this comes up, I literally read the passage and ask people, her name's Jillian, she's about here. In the second grade, she's already read the Iliad and the Odyssey, because children should know the Greek gods and the background of where they are, so that kind of gives you a clue. Her mother went to Six Flags in the 7th grade, and I said next year, Heather, you going back to Six Flags? She says, no, Father. She said, I've already been there. Why go back to Six Flags when you can read a book and go somewhere you've never been before? And so she never went back. She went in the 6th grade, and so Heather's didn't need to go back. I've already been there. So this is her daughter. Does this verse apply to Jillian Roberts? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right.
Yes.
Now think about it. If she is the child, is this inclusive or exclusive? She's only one. So is the word children inclusive or exclusive? Does it apply to her or does it not to apply to her because she's only one? It's inclusive. Hugo McCord said, the quality is a man that has believing children, not that he can reproduce like rabbits. So I don't fuss over this. I know some people, the Australian expression is they get their knickers in a knot. I understand that. But in our family, we have one granddaughter, and anything that talks about children is inclusive of her, and she's not excluded because she is a child. Now, I know congregations have had all kinds of trouble, some have split over this. I just feel like that it's an inclusive term, and the first time I heard this talked about, again, this was Raymond Kelsey, and he read both of these out of the Greek text, and he said the same application that's made in Ephesians 6:1 that says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. He said, I think it's the same application, is that he has believing children. Now, let me throw in something that you haven't asked, and then you can stone me later. When you look at Titus, and if you outline the sentence that they are faithful children, is my word, is faithful children an adjective or a verb? Faithful children. It's an adjective because it goes with the noun. Here's the verb. He who believes and is baptized. Verbs are actions of person, places, or things. What is an adjective? An adjective is descriptive, and you always go back and say, where is the noun in the phrase? I don't fight over this. You can disagree totally. But I encourage you to read Titus 1 and the qualifications and see if you find the word God in Titus 1 anywhere on the quality of elders. Can I just read it to you? I'll have to find it. What I've encouraged people to do when I'm talking about this, and I've had dear friends, especially some older people, who have said, I just don't accept this. And I said, I don't have any problem with that, but I just want you to think about it. For this reason, I left you in Crete, that you might put in order what was lacking and appoint elders in any town. If anyone is above reproach, a one-woman man, faithful children, not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. Anybody find God in the passage? So you can do this out of a Young's Concordance. Find the word faithful, and 96% of them, like for example, God is faithful. Do we assume God's been baptized? Anybody vote for God to be baptized? The word is faithful. Has the word been baptized? When you read 1 Timothy 3, you don't have any qualifications on the kid's spirituality. This is how I express it. When you diagram the sentence and you look for subject, object, and verb, the word faithful goes back to the father, and I say the weight of the passage is that the child is faithful to their father, because the Cretans will not charge them with being debauchery or insubordination. Would a pagan Cretan primarily think of debauchery and think of God? Would a pagan Cretan primarily think of insubordination and think of God? So I just say, I think the weight of the passage is that the children are faithful to their physical father. And so I encourage you, get a concordance, and you do this with Young's, and look at the verbs, he who believes and is baptized, and all the words with believing will have to do with the teaching, the understanding, whatever. When you look at the word faithful as an adjective always has to go to the nearest noun to describe the function that's there, and the weight of the passage is that. And then, here's the other thing. Does this harmonize or differ with 1 Timothy 3? So I'll leave you to look at that just to see what that is. I don't fuss with people. Especially if they're adult kids and they're not Christians, I wouldn't want to do that. But at the same time, that's my expression. When you diagram the sentence and you look for the subject, the object, and the verb, it refers primarily to the man's household. And the second question, which leads into that, if a man's children leave the church when they become adults, does that disqualify him from being an elder? I say yes and no from 2 points of view. And this is going to sound kind of contradictory. Sometimes elders who've had that happen in their families are nearly more qualified to be elders in terms of working with people who are struggling with their families because of the experiences they've gone through. To me, part of the criteria is, remember when Brother Kelsey said the umbrella term for an elder is that he's blameless? Okay? If I'm living in Medill and my 30-year-old daughter doesn't come to church and she's the town prostitute, I don't think I can be an elder, because I'm not blameless in terms of the community. There may be situations where children are either in a different place or they're not in a public position. I tend to be a little more generous from the point of view they raised them as faithful children. They left as adults. I don't always hold the parents responsible for the decisions that the children make as adults. Ezekiel 18, the soul that sins will die. The Son will not bear the iniquity of the Father, and neither will the Father bear the iniquity of the sons, for the soul that sins will die. One of the main things I try to open it with and talk with when I talk with people in a parenting class is to say that the one person in the world that has had more failure as a parent is God. If it required more righteous than unrighteous people for the sun to come up, we'd be living in the dark. If it required more godly people for it to rain than not to rain, we'd be living in a desert. Does anyone disqualify God as being our Father because the majority of the people in the world are not faithful to Him as a Father? So I look at this in a local context, and this would just be my conviction. If I'm in a situation where my children are not in the community, we're not attached, and again, that's smaller. Sarah was 3,000 people. I worked with a man from Detroit, Michigan, in a church, small town, and his wife eventually had a mental breakdown. They're just watching me all the time. I go to the store and everybody knows me. She's lived in Detroit. I go to the store and everybody knows my husband, and she eventually had a mental breakdown, and I said, the only transparency you have in a small town is openness. If you have anything to hide, you give people permission to look for it. Okay? My girlfriend through high school was on the same party line with my grandmother, who was an insomniac. And she didn't watch a lot of TV, and two longs, two shorts, a short and a long, or whatever. There were 4 or 5 of us on the same line, and the phone would ring a certain number of times. But anybody, and so she would very quickly pick the phone up, put her hand over it, and so we just assumed that 90% of our conversations were being monitored by my grandmother. Okay, that influences what you talk about with your girlfriend on the telephone. And so the only privacy that you have is transparency. And so that's how I feel. If my family is a distraction from the church, if we're in a town, a community where he or she, by their unfaithfulness, is a distraction and we're not blameless, I'm quietly going to step down. We had a godly man that had 2 sons, and they were just night and dark. And this son had done better and better for a while. He became an elder, and then the dad's term was he's fallen off the wagon. And he wasn't just drinking. And he came in and he quietly said, the position of elder is so important. I don't want my son's behavior to be a negative reflection on the church. And out of respect for the Lord's church and the eldership, that I need to step down because of my son's behavior, because everybody in the community knew that. And quietly, respectfully, then he stepped down. And in that sense, what he was saying was, we're no longer blameless because of the activities that are there. I know this is contentious with some people, and some people feel like all the kids have to be faithful all of their lives. I don't really quibble with that. I tend to go back to the word blameless and reflect on that, and that, to me, is kind of the deciding factor. Our culture and our community will help decide if the person is blameless or not. Open question. Anything else? Yo.
I feel like I'm shifting gears hard in that discussion. But I've noticed, I'm 33, and I've noticed amongst people close to age in me, good, faithful men, raising their families well, this hesitancy about approaching the idea of being an elder in the future, that somehow that office is way above them, that it terrifies them, that they couldn't possibly, you've talked about it being this, the high water mark of the spirituality of the church, or at least it should be. What would you say to men who view the eldership as being so high above them that it's seemingly unattainable or terrifying to them?
The 12 years we lived in Australia, there were no elders. And you can just imagine, if you've never been elders in the flesh, you have this kind of idealized version that I would just say is probably unrealistic. Trying to help new Christians come to terms with that. I said there's two things I think we have to hold in tension. One, he has to have the qualities to a positive degree, but if we wait until he's perfect, he'll never be qualified. And my description was, I believe the man has to have the qualities to a positive degree, and let's just say 51%. And I'm not going just for the least and the minimum, but most people had a 98% expectation. And it was unrealistic. And so they were so unrealistic up here that, you know, if Paul was married to a godly woman and had believing children, he might not qualify because they hadn't lived with that and worked with that. And so my expression was, an elder has to have the biblical qualities to a positive degree, but we would hope 10 years later he has grown into these qualities and has them in increasing measure, like Paul's talking to Timothy and Titus. And so I wasn't arguing for a watered down requirement, but to say realistic. And again, just to give a specific number, he needs to have the qualities to a positive degree, but he doesn't have to be in the 95th percentile on every one of them to qualify. Otherwise, nobody would actually do it. And here's the thing, and this varies in different situations, but I've talked with a number of elders that have just quietly said the fellowship and the brotherhood and the experience of working with the other elders has been a really positive, growing spiritual experience in my life. And for some people, that's not been the case. It's been really challenging. And I think what we should be saying to our younger guys is, this is something God is calling us to do. This is something the church desperately needs to be done. And while you are a household manager, work on having these qualities, because a part of my philosophy of ministry is, let's start from the middle and go from small to large. He who is faithful in little will be faithful in much. And so if I have little bitty kids, if I have little bitty grandkids, I'm going to start from the small, from the inside, and work the way out, and encourage them to say, this is something that we really, really need people to do. But rather than waiting until you're 50 and the kids are teenagers and on, start working on and developing these qualities in your family, and you will have a stronger, more spiritual family. But in the process, you also will be qualifying yourself, because if he can't manage his household, how can he manage the church of God? So I wouldn't urge for just a reduced minimum, but I would say a realistic minimum. And that's why with my Australian friends I said, push me if you will, but have these to a positive degree. But we don't have to wait until he's 80 years old and then he's in the upper 90th percentile of having all these qualities, because I've talked with some couples who have such an unrealistic perception of marriage, you don't even know where to start. And people can have the same view of the leadership position in the church. So I'm just saying, have it realistic, but not have such a high standard that it would be unrealistic for most people to qualify.
You know, a lot of people, even in managing a home, you're never going to manage it perfectly from the beginning. You're going to manage from the child and everything.
Right.
Elders are going to step in, because elders that are, first off, inexperienced. You're going to have an experienced elder and an inexperienced elder. And you're going to have to allow mistakes. And I think if we put an expectation on the elders that they're above man, then we've hurt the eldership. Because they're going to fail, and we should support them in their failures.
Yeah.
We're not there to remove them. to start over. We want elders that make mistakes, and we're going to have to get the mistakes.
Yeah.
We can't put expectations above ourselves as we're elders.
So, and like, for example, 3 times with our kids, our middle daughter called it a family discuss. I just said, we need to have mom, dad, and the kids. And I said, as your mom and dad, we need to apologize. We have not been consistent with A, B, and C, and that's on us. As your parents, we've let you down. Starting tonight, here's the new boundaries. Here's what we expect. We'd like to ask you to forgive us because we haven't done this as consistently as we ought to. But starting tonight, we're going to recalibrate this, and here are our expectations. I think there's something healthy occasionally for our kids to hear us apologize from the human point of view, so they know very well that we're human. But to say, as human beings, we need to make this correction, and in the future, rather than saying we're going to, drop this on you, here's what we've done. We haven't been consistent with this. Here's the new boundaries. We ask for your forgiveness. And starting tomorrow, we're going to do that. And again, I think that helps our kids to see us growing as parents. And one of the things Lynn McMillan said, he said, consistency with our kids is more important than just the level of where we are, from being a little more flexible to a little more rigid. And he said if our kids have grown up with a greater sense of consistency, that's one of the great things to help them. And we felt like there were 3 times that we needed to readjust that. So we asked for apology, for forgiveness. Here's the new standard, and here's where we're going to start tomorrow in doing that. And see, elders will have to grow through the same process of doing that.
I was thinking in that same vein, that's probably what's really meant by elders needing to be blameless. That if they do make a mistake, they're humble enough to get it right. And, ask for forgiveness, and then the congregation allow them to move on.
Yeah. And we've been doing things on Paul, and you think that description where Paul and Barnabas separated, translations will say something like a sharp contention arose among them. And one of the idioms in Greek is that it's like having a little rock in your shoe. So how long and how far are you going to walk with it's not a stone, it's not a big thing, but just that little rock is just going to, and at some point you're going to stop, take your shoe off and get that out. Well, one of the last letters we hear is, go get John Mark, bring him with you because he is useful to me in ministry. By that comment, Paul is saying Barnabas was right. Into 1 Corinthians. I have encouraged Apollos to come to you. Oh, he doesn't want to right now, but he will come when he will. And look at how with Apollos and with Mark later, Paul has grown and has learned from, again, not scripture, but as an opinion that split the partnership. And rather than blaming Barnabas or holding a grudge or becoming a victim, then he grew through that. And again, I think that's good for our children to watch us to be growing because, let me reverse and say it this way. My close friend who became an elder when I did in 2005, about 3 different times we left a meeting and we were just by ourselves, and he said, did you know this has been going on? And he'd been in this church for 20 years, and there were 3 elders meetings where it was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this was going on, which to my judgment is a good thing for the nature of it. But here it was, growing as a new elder. There were a whole group of things he needed to process that was quite happy as a member not to have to deal with. And that's where we should have the opportunity to let people grow into that mold. And then let me say it this way as well. I try to be a big supporter and encourager of our elders. Okay? Our elders have made a couple decisions at North Mac. They're matters of opinion. I would not do it that way. I would not do it that way. But I don't take my bat and ball and go home. And in fact, tomorrow, I'm agreeing to do something that our elders have asked to do. And it's a matter of judgment. I would do it completely different. But since I'm not an elder, I'm quite happy to support the decisions that they make. And as long as it's not unscriptural, there's the line. As long as it's not unscriptural, then when our elders say, this is what we want done, this is how we want this to be done, then I want to be one of the cheerleaders to support the congregation to do that, because, again, our daughter, the lawyer, says, Dad, there's already enough people in the peanut gallery, and we need to have as many encouragers and supporters. And like I said, and the elders will tell you this, there's always stuff that they know that they can't tell the rest of us that become the basis of the decision, and sometimes they will be criticized for something, but to protect all of the parties involved, they're not able to reveal all the circumstances. And so because of that, and it's only been a couple of times, but unless there's something scriptural, I'm quite glad to have my say, to say something about it. On matters of opinion, I'm going to back and support our elders. And again, in a local church, if we have more support than criticism, things are going to go forward, going to grow.
You know, as we went through COVID,
Yeah,
a lot of us elders were questioned
yes,
on the way we handled our congregation and the decisions we made.
Yes.
And so that was quite a test. Something else I wanted to say,
let me just put this on the microphone just because somebody, correct comment. Elders during COVID were questioned on decisions in a whole level more than they've probably ever been questioned on matters of opinion. Because this is not book, chapter, and verse. And different churches would choose different responses to that. And that's such a good example because in our congregation, starting the third week in May, I'm in the auditorium, online, and our elders in July, who are superintendent of a school district, retired principal. We have 4 people in education in the eldership. They said in July, in the gym, it's mask required. The auditorium is going to be open. You come at your own risk. You can watch this online. But the elders' decision is starting the third week. So we went online totally in March, and we were one of the few churches, but our guys said 3rd of July, the gym will be required mask if you come. Auditorium is optional. You can watch online. And there were all kinds of reactions that people had, but then that's what they chose to do. Some elders didn't worship for a year, but that was their call. Sorry, go ahead.
talking about some of the things like children. And,
Yes.
you know, we have several things like husband of one wife, leaving children. You know, we have several different qualifications that people won't agree on. You can ask 20 different scholars, you get 20 different answers. The way I've always looked at it is that God knows everything. And when He set up the qualifications, He knew that churches were going to have difficulty finding men to become elders. And it's extremely important to have elders in the church. I don't know how a church can function without them, truthfully. I've never been in one. But when I look at those different things, I think, okay, these are things that would be out of the control of a man. He couldn't control how many children he had. He can't control if his wife of 60 years passes away. He can't control his adult children when they go off and go their own ways. So, if God intended for those things to be, you know, that tough, to me, that's kind of a punishment to the man who wants to serve as an elder and who has been serving as a good elder. That's just the way I try to look at items like that.
And I would say, again, here we're back to our DNA thing. Some churches are going to take kind of a different position on that. Like I said, as I've talked to people, I primarily say, let's first of all go through the text and go from the text to our discussion and our agreement, where some people have already decided and they want the text to say what they've already decided. And like I said, we had wonderful, well, for Valentine's Day, my son worked with us for 3 years. We did a faithful and true. We had 51 marriages of 50 years or longer in our congregation. 37 of them, both of them were still alive. So we requested pictures, and my son has this, his dad come in, he said, look at this. He said, they didn't choose to have their pictures in color black. They're all in black and white because color hadn't been invented yet. And so here were a whole group of people that any wedding photos they had were only in black and white. And so you could tell by the 50 photos that we had when color came in. Well, when I talked with the older members about faithful as an adjective rather than a verb, we got a little bit lost in translation because I wouldn't do it in Greek. But if you don't have a strong English background to begin with, it sounds so much the same that they lost the point. And I just said, we're not going to fight over this. I'm just telling you, this is what I think the weight of the passage is, and we'll have to work with it from there. And I think if we can extend to each other a spirit of grace and try not to get in a situation where if I don't get my way, I'm leaving this church. And that's what happens sometimes. That becomes unfortunate because sometimes there's matters of opinion about it.
Selection of elders. I'm sure you've been in several different congregations. They've probably been in several different ways. Is that right?
Yep.
Do you have a preference?
Well, and again, we've only been at this congregation since January 2020. At North MacArthur, the elders, and we're going to get into DNA. Mac Lyon helped start the church, and we're 50 years old. And their philosophy has always been, well, we're in a church of 600 people and we only have 7 elders by choice. And they feel like an eldership of 12 or 15 is harder to function. So it's not scripture, but that's the DNA of our congregation. In our current congregation, the elders put forward, select people that they think might be qualified. The congregation can talk on it, but we don't have everybody fill out a form and turn it in and do that like we do in some other congregations. That's a judgment call. Some people will be a little bit critical that, oh, they're trying to hand select the successors. But on the other hand, what I like about it is that the elders, being on the inside, have a better perspective, one, of what the job is and who's likely to be able to fill that than someone who's been a Christian for 2 years who doesn't know the inside part of the job. So that has worked very well, and I've also been in congregations where everybody turns in names. Everything short of campaign signs, handing out cards, literally. And David Roper was with us for a number of years. And bless his heart, he was 87 years old, very, very strong physically and emotionally. And he felt like he didn't want to stand before God and not have served as an elder. And I'll just say he campaigned for it. And the elders talked to David Roper, and he said, well, I'll go take one from the team. And he said, you're a good man, you have good intentions, however, you are so self-willed and so driven, I think those qualities disqualify you, and on behalf of the elders, I think you should step down. That's a hard thing to do. But here's the other thing. Would you rather deal with that before the guy becomes an elder? Or would you rather deal with that with him in the eldership as an elder? And my policy is, I would much rather do the hard things first. And that's what I told the new Christians in Australia. I said, we have trouble in a church with no elders, but you have never had trouble until you have an unqualified elder as an elder. because that just magnifies all of the problems. And see, that's why I said we don't even have a term for de-elder. I mean, but this congregation, you can imagine. I mean, can you imagine the elders getting up 2 weeks from now and saying, you know, Brother Smith and Brother Jones have been talked with and worked with, and the elders have determined that they no longer meet the qualities of being an elder, and starting next Sunday, they will no longer serve as elders in this congregation. I mean, you talk about hearing a pin drop. But my point is, I would much rather do that on the front end and take whatever heat and whatever friction comes from that, because having unqualified people in is a whole different problem that intensifies everything, and the chronically anxious just have an absolute picnic when that goes on. Yes.
So, you know, a lot of us here are in our smaller congregations and
Yep.
stuff, and a lot of what this day was about trying to put an emphasis on really the future, right? What can we learn? What can we take from all of this to help, you know, enrich our future with elders and leaders specifically? So, you know, North MacArthur, we've got, you know, preacher, I think I'm not there anymore, preacher training camps,
Yeah.
right? There's different things that are going on that foster that growth. Well, you know, outside of you know, maybe having Bible classes on it and lessons and sermons and such, what can we do, you know, collectively as all of the congregations that are represented here, what can we do to help drive the growth, and what can we do to teach our younger men about the importance of this? What can we have? What can we do? I think you see where I'm going, but
Yeah.
it's a problem, and it needs, I mean, I don't know. I don't know where to go with it.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, Coy and David Roper have been in Sydney for 10 years, so technically I'm what was called the second wave. You know, when all the original workers have left for a brand new congregation, that is a major, major adjustment, because these people have always been there, they're committed, they're dedicated. And so then when you come in as the second wave, you don't have the maturity, you don't have the relationships, and on and on. And so this is something we talked about a lot. Anytime I can talk to the guys who are 18 to the mid-20s or something, I would just use the term, we need to plant the seed as early as we can in a positive way. And so in this case, these guys were single, and again, that was part of the conversation. Hey guys, one of the things to think about, yes, I'm talking about your wife, you know, personal things, on and on it goes. 2 comments from great grandmother, marry in haste, repent in leisure. My Dust Bowl grandmother would say, he who marries a pretty skirt has that empty stomach. It's not just what's on the outside. But other than those types of personal things, be thinking about this when you're in your teens and 20s. And then as these couples met and married, anytime I can talk with the 2 of them, because she's an indispensable part of this. And like I said, we have very clear boundaries about not including some things, but you think about this, most of our early churches met in households, and there would be a lot of churches that would actually meet in the elder's house. Not always, not a commandment, but because of his maturity, because of his position and all that stuff. And you think, could there be a greater advertisement for a local church than to be meeting in a godly, spiritually functioning household? So every time we can model a positive elder relationship, but I think, like that term about tapping on the shoulder, I think we need to be approaching people and talking with them, yes, classes and things, but anytime I get a chance to talk to someone younger, that's something we still want to talk about, because you can't wait till you're 50. If you wait till you're 50, there's some things that you can't go back on. And yes, some guys have done the right thing and have matured into that. But I think on the whole, we would be further ahead if we kind of tap people on the shoulder and talk with them and plant the seeds. And I think there are some, this would be appropriate sometimes, but I think there would be some occasions that elders meetings would be appropriate to have some of our younger guys in, especially if it's something that concerns what they're doing. Because you stop and think about it, there's a whole group of people when are put up to be an elder have never been in an elders meeting, maybe ever. And that just makes it that much further. And so we had a statement at Eastside. Anytime we needed to talk with someone correctively, we tried to do it in ones or twos rather than them feeling like they've been called into the principal's office. Because for some members, how many elders do we have here? Okay, but even with 3 elders, if the 3 elders just call a regular member into an elders meeting, what are they likely to think? You're in trouble. We had a wonderful couple at Eastside. They helped with trunk or treat. They helped with Thanksgiving dinner. They helped and helped and helped. We had invited them to our house for lunch to say thank you. So they're the last ones there, and they pull up, and obviously they're at our house, and there are either 2 or 3 elders' cars at our house, and she looks at him and says, "What have we done wrong?" And this is one of our strongest couples. But you see what I'm saying? We try to avoid the being called into the principal's office type thing, and if we needed, and there's some times that needs to be done. But anytime we can do that in ones or twos and talk to them informally, the perception that the congregation has also has a lot to do with the perception that people has, do I want to be a part of this myself in the future? So we tried to be, kind of use the term customer friendly as much as we could, but also try to plant positive ideas of things that people can do and plant those seeds and encourage them to do that along the way.
And, one of the reasons we had this today was that we have one elder that, was in his 80s now.
Yes.
And Ed and I are both from the mid-60s.
Yep.
And a couple of us have had health scares.
Yes.
And so we very much know that we need to be looking for the next
Yes.
line of elders and deacons, and the best time to bring in younger elders when you still got older ones.
That's right.
That they can learn from.
Yep.
And so part of the reason we had this today gives us an opportunity to see what young guys came today that be interested in being leaders, and that kind of gives us a chance to see, who's kind of interested. Obviously, they're here, and gives us something maybe to work with.
Exactly. And like I said earlier, for those people who aren't elders, I would, again, look at the potential of what can be done rather than it being kind of this impossible dream that's only reserved for a few. And this is a reality. I don't know current generation because I'm not there, but the missionaries in my generation had an expression: there arose an eldership that knew not the missionary. The quote comes from Joseph: there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Kent was supported by 29th and Yale in Tulsa, and within 5 years of being on the field, none of the elders who sent him were still elders. Thankfully, he had worked with the young people for 2 years, and several of the deacons who had kids became elders, but you can have a situation where the elders agree to support somebody or do something, and in 3 or 4 years, the new elders may do something totally, that's their call, they may do something totally different. As much as we can support continuity, that helps us in the long run, rather than having to start all over from scratch.
Being on the other side of this and trying to promote a positive view of the eldership, I can't help but think of a slightly altered phrase that the Jenkins brothers will sometimes offer about preachers. Maybe it would help if we didn't have a grilled elder for Sunday lunch.
Yep.
That how I talk about the eldership in front of my family, in front of other members of the church, is going to increasingly either promote or dissuade a positive view of the eldership.
Totally agree. Let me make one last comment, and then we'll do any shutdown time was.
So I was going to ask one more thing.
Kent and I have talked about this. We grew up in the Sayre Church, and there were 40 of the Hartman clan in a church of 300. So grandfather was an elder, on and on it goes. In the whole family, we cannot ever remember any discussion by adults, either about the preacher, about the elders, or the church that was negative. And we had some very strong-willed people in the family. And you stop and think about that, that makes it a whole lot easier for us to consider ministry and things, because I'm sure there were discussions on the side, but our whole family was very, very conscious that the tone and the things that we talk about in our family have a major impact. My wife went to lunch occasionally with a family with 4 girls, and this was her comment. She said before we left the parking lot, it was either roasted preacher, barbecued song leader, fried. In other words, on the way to lunch and during lunch, nearly every Sunday, like movie critics, the whole conversation between the parents and the 4 girls was, well, what wasn't good today? Do you want to guess how many of the 4 girls are faithful today? Not a one of them. And I think a lot of, in contrast to what I said about our family, a lot of it was the conversation that the parents and the children had, because the way they spoke about the church then caused the kids to just have a total, they were just annihilated over a period of time. And that's why I say, to the degree we can support and encourage both our elders and the local church, there's a lot of long-term benefits to that down the road. Yes.
I think as parents, when this happens in our own home, admittedly, is sometimes worry and fear and anxiety that my wife and I may have. We're recognizing, we're realizing that projects and right upon our children. And when we're thinking of leadership, and especially reaching the goal of eldership at some point, that should just be a natural part of our spiritual growth. We shouldn't worry about trying to reach it. We should just be getting busy, serving, loving, doing those things, and then at some point in time, we're going to be qualified for it.
Yep.
We only need to be a step ahead, aside from meeting those qualifications. If we're leading others, we just need to be a step ahead of the majority in order to lead them.
Yes, sir.
So earlier you mentioned that, you know, being a deacon is not a stepping stone. And so I think probably a lot of us have been guilty of viewing it that way. I've viewed it that way, that, you know, you probably first need to be a deacon and, you know, get some things under your belt and learn some things, and now you can move on into being an elder. But, what would you say if, you know, we've talked about all day about, look, if you're already doing some of these things, you don't have to be a deacon, you don't have to be an elder. If you're already doing, you're doing some of those qualities already that would then qualify you. So would you say it would be wise, would it be okay if you've got people, if you've got men in a congregation who maybe they're not even deacons, but would it be okay to say, you know what, I think that person right there would be a good elder without even being a deacon?
Yeah.
Do you think that'd be,
Yeah, I was in a
Okay.
church where 2 of our 4 elders weren't even deacons. They were deeply involved, they were doing stuff. And they weren't negative about this, but it was like, I'm already so involved doing A, B, and C, being a deacon, I'd have to step away from some type, so, and they had full-time jobs, but they were very deeply involved in ministry aspects in the church, and I felt like they qualified themselves by the lifestyle and the things that they had done beforehand. But like I said, and they're good elders, but 2 of the 4 never were deacons at all, but they were doing many of these things which then helped prepare them and qualify them to be elders. And the reason I say that too is that there could be kind of like a hierarchy, be kind of like an expectation, a graduation type thing. And I just think that we need to have a view of deacons that parallels the ministry of Jesus serving, rather than see these guys as a halfway house and a training ground in hopes that they someday become elders. And if they do, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the position needs to have a certain respect and a certain dignity because of the service of Jesus, irrespective of whether or not they ever become an elder or not.
And that makes sense.
So some deacons, we've had in the past, I've seen some great deacons, but were not apt to teach.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and
So that disqualified them.
yeah, and like our guy named Connie. Connie has helped, fed, clothed, but he'd be the first to tell you, I'm not elder material was his term for several reasons, but no one served and no one helped and fed more than he did. And again, I think that's a part of that body type thing. We're not all to be one particular part, and the fact that, and in fact, he just recently stepped down. I was talking to the secretary, and we're talking about maybe 60 years. He served in one, but maybe the last 40. He's been the deacon in charge of benevolence, like I said, thousands. And I can just tell you many times it came out of his back hip pocket as much as out of the church treasury. And so he just served and helped and served, never with the view, I'm doing this to become an elder. So it's an amazing blessing to the whole church.
I had a follow-up question to go with Todd's question. Growing up, I was at a lot of congregations that didn't have elders. How do you go about the selection of elderships when there isn't already an eldership in place?
Yes. Some churches would never do this, but sometimes it's good to ask an elder or a preacher in a fellow congregation if they would come and help with the process. I mean, sometimes you'll have people on the inside that can kind of work with that. But I've seen a couple of situations where they've asked someone that kind of is known and trusted, would you come in and kind of just help lead this and direct this? And a lot of it depends upon the personality, if there's a preacher there, combination of the preacher's personality. But you look, that's specifically what Titus is to do. Timothy's involved in that. So it may be with the preacher to help. Some preachers, the situation may be volatile enough that they don't want to get in the middle of it. But like I said, I've seen a couple of situations where they've asked, if I use the word neutral, you know what I'm trying to say? Someone who is neutral on the outside to kind of help with the process. Because here's the deal. You can go to Bible class for 40 years, but when they start holding those characteristics up, oh, he is blameless, he is a one-woman man. Some people have never had that kind of personal scrutiny because they've been quite happy being generic Christians, and no one's ever kind of gone down the list like that. And so in 2002, the elders asked Sheila and I and a couple from California to consider being elders, and they had 2 birth children and 2 adopted children, and the adopted children as adults weren't faithful. We had older people who were taught it's all the kids all the time in every situation, and they'd been elders before, but they'd never heard that before. And there were maybe 15% of the church was going to leave if he became an elder. So we went to this couple and we said, let's both step down. We can appoint deacons. We're not going to split the church over this. And we're sorry that this has happened, this has come up. But if both of us step down, then we get a fresh start. They can look at that again. And I think the process is more important than just driving for the result. And so the next Sunday, I just stood up for both of us and I just said, you know, Will and Lil, what a wonderful couple. Will and Lil and Dale and Sheila, as of today, are withdrawing their names and being considered as elders. And that way, that let him save some face, and that kept also 15% of our church from leaving. And that to me was more important than pushing that through and in the process splitting the church. Let me do this as we close. There is a cream and a gray, if we can get guys to hand those out. Like I said, one of them is on ministry, kenosis, and I need to apologize for something. Some of the pages you'll have to turn to read. A gracious person volunteered, may I please help you, which you're grateful for people to do that. And I'm not going to throw all these away and get all the pages correlated correctly. You can read them, but sometimes you're going to have to turn the page around. And I was grateful for the person that volunteered to help and didn't want them to feel like, one, they had been a failure, and I'm too tight to throw this much paper away and start all over and do the other. So when you get those, some of those you'll have to turn back in front to do that. So let me say this, thank you. What a blessing to be with you. And hope for time. Well, let me say it this way. Several people at church say, I learn more when I go home and read the notes than I learned while I was in class. And that's why I'd rather do a lot of visual things. I work a lot on notes, and you'll have a lot of things to go back and kind of look at. And I think down the road, that gives you a chance to put some of those things together and look at it from there. So thank you for the blessing of getting to be with me today.